Today was the final day of the IGC Zurich Chess Challenge. The classical tournament was over. Magnus Carlsen was a convincing winner, and on this final day they played a rapid play tournament. That is, each player had 15 minutes on the clock plus 10 seconds every time they made a move. Now this is a pretty fast time control, so we can't expect accurate chess, and there were quite a few blunders. There were some brilliances as well, but we can't expect perfect chess even from these top players. In round one there was already quite a significant result. Let me take you through the game Fabiano Caruana against Hikaru Nakamura. Of course, Nakamura, a great rapid play specialist, as he showed in London just before Christmas. Let's see how Caruana got on against him. Caruana has white, and you can see that it's a pretty regular Benoni type position. So this pawn is advanced to d5, and black has this typical Benoni pawn structure, this overlap. It's a majority of pawns on the queen side, whereas white has a majority of pawns on the king side. Now the difference between this fianchetto variation and other variations of the Benoni is that white hasn't committed this pawn to e4. So that actually, there are pros and cons. There's no great threat to overrun black with e5, but it means that black has less to hit at. Often e4 can actually be vulnerable. So, okay, it just changes the nature of the position. There's more piece play. Nakamura has just played bishop here, and if he can get in knight e4, that'll mean these two bishops look very good on the long diagonal. So Caruana shut that possibility down straight away with knight here. I think that's a good move. And the bishop came back again. And now the queen just nudged forward. That's a nice move. Means there's no chance of g5 for the moment, and claims that diagonal. So now knight h5 from Nakamura, hitting the bishop, which of course dropped back. Now he did that because he wanted to bring his knight here, otherwise bishop takes pawn would have been a move. So Nakamura just bringing his knight out. And now I suspect he overlooked Caruana's next move. Excellent stuff, because now of course if this is taken, then the queen recaptures, it's check followed by queen takes knight. Now that knight hits the pawn and hits the bishop, so the bishop really had to come back. Now actually that knight really can't do much from f5, not at the moment, so Caruana just moved it back here, but this is a nice manoeuvre, as we'll see. Rook b8 from Nakamura, good move, because black needs counterplay here. There's no particular counterplay on the king side because white is so secure with these four pawns and the bishop in front of the king. So black needs to attack on the queen side. Good move from Caruana. So that after b5, which came, then he can capture en passant. And that means that he can operate on these squares, which Caruana did straight away. You can see that white can go straight on to play on the queen side without having to worry about his centre. This is the great thing about this variation from white's point of view. Okay, this knight was traded, and you can see this knight is really out on a limb, so Nakamura brought it back here. And now, nice manoeuvre from Caruana. He's bringing his queen and bishop over, looking at black's king. It's also preventing that knight coming to this square f5, which would free black's position. It's tempting black into playing this move, and I think that would severely weaken black's king, actually, because it's going nowhere after that. White even sometimes has this possibility to swing over. Anyway, Nakamura didn't do that. Instead he played bishop e7. So he wants to try and reach this important diagonal again. Now, nice manoeuvre from Caruana. The bishop hits the queen. The queen is forced to come up, not a very good square, blocking the bishop. And now Caruana moved the bishop back. So he's brought the bishop where it really wants to go, on the long diagonal, but he's displaced black's queen. Nakamura saw nothing better than to move back. And now, excellent manoeuvre. You can see how Caruana is using these weakened squares on the queen side, and there's nothing much for this rook to do here when the bishop stands there. Bishop attacks the rook, comes back. Okay, Nakamura at least has brought his bishop to a nice square, but Caruana continues with his manoeuvre, and this knight is beautifully placed on c6, protected by pawn and bishop. Rook had to move across, and now this is a great move. So, having established this knight, this excellent square, now Caruana starts some initiative on the other side of the board. If this knight ever moves, then White can push on to disrupt Black's king position. Bishop came back, and now Caruana starts another excellent manoeuvre. This phase of the game was really beautiful. I suspect that Nakamura completely overlooked White's idea here. He plays his king up. So this is another idea behind h4, and he's now wants to play bishop h3, and that's very unpleasant for Black to deal with. You can see that Nakamura really lacks space. And now bishop h3, skewering queen and rook here, and there's only one sensible way to stop that. Well, it's not that sensible actually. I mean, Black has a bad position now, and e4. You can see that Black is very sensitive here on this diagonal towards the king. And, well, Nakamura is just lost now. Rooks were exchanged. Let's just see what happened. This knight came back into play. Caruana took another pawn. You can see Black's king position is completely shattered. A check. The king came back. Queen here. Bishop here. Very nice, just exchanging off one of the defenders. Nakamura exchanged off that dangerous knight and then protected his knight here. But, okay, now he's just utterly lost. It's time for the queen to move in and threatens a devastating check. And in a few moves, Nakamura resigned. A really convincing victory from Caruana. It's rare that in rapid play that you see a game that's quite as smooth as this. Normally there's some kind of tactic that would upset one player's strategy, but here Caruana kept everything beautifully under control. But still, that was only the first round, and well, as the rounds went on, players were beating each other. There was no one who was taking a clear lead. It came to round 4, and there was a crunching counter between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. At this point, Carlsen had 1.5 points out of 3. So, you know, he was still in with a shout, actually, if he could defeat Caruana in this round. We joined the game after 38 moves. Magnus Carlsen played quite enterprisingly. He exchanged a rook and a pawn for a bishop and a knight. So you can see that that's the material balance. Bishop and knight for Caruana, and rook and pawn for Carlsen. Carlsen was hoping, I think, to be able to maybe get to this pawn here and then start advancing his queenside pawns. But I think he overlooked a tactic, and Caruana has been able to establish his knights very well in the centre of the board. They're well protected, well, by each other, but also by the queen. So it's very important when you have minor pieces against heavy pieces that the minor pieces have sufficient protection, and they have that in this position. Nevertheless, it's still a tricky position. Caruana now played, I think, a very good move. He just nudged his king up here. We've seen that in quite a few games in this tournament, that before embarking on any serious plan, first one player just improves the position of the king, just ruling out any tricks, for example, some random check on the back rank, We saw it, for example, in Magnus Carlsen's game against Caruana in the final round of the classical tournament where Carlsen played that. Okay, good move. Carlsen tried to do the same with King G7. Now, this looks as though it should be a good move. It puts the king on a black square, away from any potential problems with the bishop. But actually this turned out to be a mistake. This was an excellent move. Now the queen looks at the knight, but also in the direction of the king. So, for example, Carlsen would like to keep that knight on c5 because it's controlling a lot of good squares. It protects that pawn, for example. But he can't protect that because now you can see why it was a mistake to put the king on g7. This forces mate, a double discovered checkmate followed by queen g7. That's the end. Or, let me see, if the rook protects the knight here, well, that self-pin is rather unpleasant, and then this knight comes in threatening to attack the queen, and again, that's a very unfortunate position of black's king. So, Carlsen decided to retreat the knight. And now, a very good move from Caruana. He advanced his pawn. Now, that pawn covers this square, preventing the knight finding a good square on e5. So that means this knight is still in a very poor position. And, there could soon be threats to take that pawn. Or, maybe the safest might be bringing the queen down. So Carlsen advanced that pawn. It's still perhaps tenable for black. And the knight came in. And now Carlsen was very short of time, and he played the knight here, trying to cover these squares, but this was just a blunder, because after knight here, the queen was attacked, and if it moves, again we have that devastating discovered check again. Carlsen played, this move here, it's desperate. Knight f5, one immediately check, and if pawn takes knight, then queen takes queen, and that's soon going to be checkmate. So, a disappointing loss for Carlsen, and going into the last round, he could even be caught in the overall standings if he lost. So he played it very safe, and with white against Anand, he just played solidly and took the game into a draw. So that meant that Magnus Carlsen still won the tournament overall. Caruana drew in the last round against Aronian, and that meant that the final standings in the rapid play tournament were Fabiano Caruana with 4 out of 5, Hikaru Nakamura with 3.5, Aronian with 3, Carlsen with 2, Gelfand with 1.5, and poor old Vichy at the bottom of the table with 1 out of 5. Now, in the overall standings, that meant that Magnus Carlsen won with 10 points. Fabiano Caruana caught Aronian, so Caruana and Aronian shared second place with 9 points. So I think that rapid play tournament showed that Carlsen doesn't just have potential challengers in Aronian and Nakamura. Maybe Caruana could be a potential challenger for him in the future. Remember, Caruana is only 21 years old. So it's been a great tournament, and I think in the classical chess, that's the one that really counted, it was a great return for Magnus Carlsen. The next big chess event is the Candidates Tournament, starting in Khanty-Mansiysk in Russia in mid-March. 8 players will be doing battle to see who will become the challenger for Magnus Carlsen for the World Championship match in November. So do join me for that one. Thanks very much for watching, and if you like this YouTube channel, then do subscribe. It's quite free. Okay, bye now.